Hey folks, this is what I like to see. Stop Here Now sale, 50% off all vinyl. And look at this. We have boxes and boxes of vinyl. So, it's your average stuff. It's $3 records for about $1.50. Shades of Deep Purple. Nothing too groundbreaking. Let's see what we got here. Let's just do a real quick dig. Got some Jeff Beck. Not sure, I've never seen them before. Got some Nilsson. So I'm gonna kind of dig through here and see what we got. A rough copy of a Deep Purple Machine Head. That is a wicked looking album. We'll see what that is. And look up there on the wall. That's a nice thing, poster from the 70s of Angie Dickinson. So anyway, I think we kind of hit it big here. I'm going to have some fun. We're not going to film the whole thing. Oh, look at this. The Ruddles. So I guess they were a Beatles, kind of a band that had a spin on the Beatles. I'm going to have to pick this up for $1.50. So that's what we're doing today. We're out. Yep, folks, we went antiquing this weekend. And I bought 5 records. So I'll show those to you here in just a second. Yeah, we have a little spot we like to go to here in Fort Worth. I would say it's one of the best antique malls here in the DFW area. It's called the Montgomery Antique Mall, and I don't know how long it's been there. It's at least the 50s or the 60s, and you walk inside and it's like walking into a different time. It's got a proper tea room where you can sit down and drink some tea and eat sandwiches, and then you can just spend the whole day looking at stuff. And fortunately for me, they've got a real nice record store, or you might call it not really a store, but a booth, if you will. So we found a booth. They had records on sale for $2 a piece. And so let's just start right off on what I got. The Ruddles. Which, I'll be honest, I didn't know very much about the Ruddles. And I've heard about them probably my whole life. I knew they were kind of a Beatles mock band. A band that kind of mocked the Beatles. And that was about as far as it went. I didn't know their history. I just thought, okay, comedy band kind of riding on the coattails of the Beatles. Yawn. Who cares, right? But I don't know. Recently, I think I seen it on somebody else's channel. I don't know whose it was. It might have been me, Mr. Mayo. I don't know. So I seen it. I was like, let's pick it up. That looks kind of cool. So we listened to it, and it was funny. It sounds like the Beatles, but it's not. And I did some digging, and I did not know that they did a movie. So there's a movie called All You Need Is Cash that they made in 1977. So it's a mockumentary, and from what I understand, it's probably one of the first mockumentaries. And it's like the Beatles anthology 20 years early. So before there was a Beatles anthology. And doing some research here, I guess they had started the Beatles anthology back in the 70s. They started this really big, dynamic documentary on the Beatles. And let me go back a second. The Ruddles were done by a member or members of Monty Python's Flying Circus. So already that gives you some credibility. Some comedy cred. And also in conjunction with Saturday Night Live, Lorne Michaels. And if you watch the movie, you'll see John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, Gilda Radner, and Bill Murray in there as well. So Eric Idle of Monty Python, he had another show, I can't remember what the name of it, but he had another show on the BBC at the time, and he did a little skit about the Ruddles. and he was talking to Lorne Michael at the time. I don't know if he hosted SNL or he had something to do with Saturday Night Live. Eric Idle did, and he showed him the skit, and Lorne Michael said, "Hey, why don't we make a movie? Me and you will, in conjunction." And Eric Idle said, "Yeah, I can sell it to the BBC." And Lorne Michael said, "Shoot bigger, sell it to NBC, and make more money." So that's what they did, and they wrote this fake documentary about a fake band called, I guess that's what you call a mockumentary. So I watched it over the weekend. I bought the album, did some research, and I watched it over the weekend. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. It, it's basically the stories of the Beatles, but everything is funny. Everything's a little different, a little backwards, and under humorous light. For example, Yoko Ono is not Yoko Ono, she's Hitler's daughter. So she's walking around with a swastika, and basically she's a Nazi. And that's funny because everybody says she broke up the Beatles. And there's all sorts of little things like that, hundreds of things like that in that movie. So really you should watch it if you get the opportunity. Now, what did the Beatles think of this? Well, let me just tell you right now, George Harrison has a cameo in this movie. Him and Eric Idle were friends. He supported this movie, so he was all in for it. He liked it. Ringo, as far as I know, there's not much to say. I think he was on board. I think he liked the movie. John and Yoko loved this movie. Even though that Yoko was portrayed as a Nazi, she loved it. So did John. Linda McCartney thought it was fantastic. Paul, not so much. Now, he didn't sue or anything, but he just was a little hesitant. He thought some of the stuff was a little too close to home. So, if we're getting that kind of word, from the Beatles camp, I'm sure he really did not like this project at all. But most of the Beatles were behind it, and they thought it was funny. The album as a whole, if you are a Beatles completist, this would be an essential buy. If not, it's just kind of a fun buy. And the songs are not that bad. They're definitely not as good as the Beatles songs, but they're really not that bad. So that was the first, the Ruddles. That was the first album I picked up Saturday at the antique shop. The second one is an album that I've been wanting to get for a long time, but for some reason I've always passed it, and that is Yes Songs, a 3-record set. And when you find these things, and if you're watching this, I'm sure you do a lot of digging, a lot of record digging, going through crates, and you notice that you never find a really good copy of this. I mean, this one looks always beaten up. Now, the vinyl inside looks pretty nice, but this is just always beat to hell. Now, why is that? Well, here's my theory. People store their records in sleeves, and this won't fit in a regular sleeve. They just won't. Now, there are sleeves for it, and I have some, and I'm storing it in a proper double, it's actually a box set sleeve, so it's getting taken care of now. But for the most part, people don't think of that. They buy their sleeves. If it doesn't fit, screw it, throw it in the pile and let it find its own way, its own battle. So I think that's why these don't look that good. The sound quality, this is a great live album. This may be the best of all the Yes Live albums. And the artwork is fantastic too. I mean, you get not just the music, but I mean, you get like a triple dose, a quadruple dose of Roger Dean. And that's part of buying the album just for itself. You get his artwork. The third album was Yes Shows. And this is good too. I mean, it doesn't get the greatest reviews. I don't know why. Gates of Delirium is insane. I mean, as far as hearing it live, it's just I love it. Um, Came with this little thing. Ritual Part 1 and 2, they're broken up into different sides. Don't Kill the Whale, Parallels, Time in a Word, they're all great. So this is a great album. And this came out in 1980. And this, even though it's a live album, to me this just kind of marks the end of the classic Yes era. Yes, they had gone through different singers and guitar players and drummers. And the only constant member was Chris Squire. But it just seemed like this was it. And then 90125 came out in 1983. This was 1980. And they were off on a different era. Roger Dean cover art was not that prominent in the 80s. I don't think there was any in the 80s. And then in the 90s, he kind of came back a little bit. But then they were on a different era. So I think this was, to me, this kind of marks the end of that first classic era, even though they had been through different phases. And here's some more Roger Dean stuff. You know what? Yeah, that's Roger Dean. In a way, it doesn't look like Roger Dean. So I say that, but who knows? Family photographs. So that's kind of cool to have. The third album I got was Big Bambooey, Cheech and Chong. This one did not come with the rolling paper. I guess it's a giant rolling paper. You could probably roll a pound of weed or 2 pounds of weed with it. I don't know. But that's not important to me. It would have been cool to come with the rolling paper, but I bought it for $2. So this is by far my favorite Cheech and Chong album. Do I have them all yet? Maybe I do at this point. I've got quite a few of their albums. I have to go back and look. But it's got, what's it got? Let's Make a Dope Deal on it. Let me see. And that is funny. Sister Mary Elephant, hilarious. Streets of New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco. Empire, Hancock, Let's Make a Dope Deal. What's the other one? Oh, The Tortured Old Man. It's a great, and for $2, you can't go wrong. Number 5 was something I had never heard of before. Psychedelic Visions by a band called The Underground, which I think the band was just a bunch of cobbled musicians. They were just cobbled together to make a band, and these are standards. Some of the songs: Psychotic Reaction, Shout, Psychedelic Dream, Psychotic Vibrations, Tobacco Road, we've all heard that one, Psychedelic Visions, Mindjammer, The Warper. A lot of this is instrumental, and it works really well. This is 1967, and it's kind of rare. I mean, I bought it for $2, but I was seeing it, not that I'm going to resell it or flip it, because I'm not a flipper, but I was seeing this going for like $14 to $30 in not so good a shape out on Discogs. So apparently it's kind of a rare album, and it sounds good too. It's a very fuzzy, very garagey. It's got the instrumental thing going for it. What more can I say? It's, if you were to boil down psychedelic music in 1967 and serve it to somebody on a platter and say, this is what it is, and not have any hits, this would be an album. Okay, this is what it sounds like. There's no hits on it. It doesn't sound great. It doesn't sound bad. It's just okay. So somehow it's I guess maybe it's a little bit of a collector's item. But and it was in pretty bad shape too. I had to get the spin clean to it and spin it many times. Had to repair the album. Somebody had been, I don't know, they were making s'mores or whatever while listening to this, but it was caked with like chocolate syrup. It was caked all in the back of this. I had to wash all that off. But anyway, it's in better shape now than when I rescued it. So those were the 5. I had 5 from the Antique Mall. So I think I did pretty good for, what was it, about $9? $9 or $10. And speaking of yes, I got this in another package off Discogs, and this was pretty cheap too. You can find this cheap, and it is really good. This is Patrick Moraz, the keyboardist of Yes, on the Relayer album. He was their keyboardist from 74 to 76. It was only on one album. And this is called The Story of I. Now, this particular album, this was an early one, does not say Story of I. It just looks like an I there. And that is his symbol, Patrick Moraz's symbol. And over the years, people were calling it I. They didn't really know what to say. They were saying it was Patrick Moraz's solo self-titled album, but apparently it's called Story of I. And the later releases actually reflect that. After they, Yes, released Relayer in 75, everybody split to do a solo album. So there were 5 Yes solo albums that came out in 75 and 76. You had Chris Squire, Steve Howe, Alan White, Patrick Moraz, and John Anderson. And I don't know, this is pretty damn good. And I have not heard the Alan White one, so we can take him out of the mix for now. But out of the 4 that I've heard, it's probably a tie between Anderson, Squire, and this one. I know that this one doesn't get a lot of praise, but I really like it. Steve Howe's, not so good. He probably shouldn't sing. What else have I listened to? A couple weeks ago, we talked about how I love Black Mountain, and I had all their, well, not all of their side projects. I was waiting for one in the mail, so I had all their studio stuff and most of their side projects, and there was one that I was waiting for, and I didn't get to show you. Well, it came in a couple weeks ago, and it's called Dream on Dreary, and it has Amber Weber on it, and it sounds, if you watch this, you'll hear me talk about Freak Folk and how it was real popular in the turn of the century, 2000 to 2004. As a matter of fact, I talked about it last week whenever I showed an album by the bass player for a band called Espers. And this, while I would not call it all the way Freak Folk, has a lot of those qualities. It's definitely a folk album. It's definitely dark. Does it go all the way into total weirdness? Maybe not. But it's kind of a darkish folk album that was released at the turn of the century with Amber Weber on vocals. And it does its job. It's very good. It makes you feel dark, cold, like maybe it would be a good rainy day album. Really, to be honest with you, it makes you feel like it's cold and wet outside, but it's good. Let's see. We're right at 18 minutes, so I think I'm gonna wrap it up. I had a couple more, but we'll show it next week. Oh, one more thing. I'm going to, probably this fall, in the middle of one of our videos, I'm going to show something non-music related. Yeah, these things here, these handles that we have, we make these, and what I'm probably going to do is have a little video on how we make them. So I probably talk about music for a little bit and then break, how every so often I'll do a little, um, what do we call them, field trips or whatever. And then I'll show you how we make these things. Even though it's not music related, it's entertaining, and it's something we do around the house here. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. I don't even have any wax at the moment. We got a ton of these things. Every year I order about 15 pounds of wax, and we make candles. So hopefully you guys will enjoy that. That will be in about 2 months, if that happens. Who knows, maybe earlier, if I get a wild hair and just decide to order some wax. But anyway, hopefully you guys have had a nice week, and we will catch you next time. Catch you on the flip side, and we'll see you.